Have you guys ever heard of asbestos? Asbestos is a naturally occurring silicate material that has been used as early as 4,500 years ago in modern-day Finland. But throughout history, you could find it in Persia, Greece, and Egypt. The main reason they used asbestos throughout history is that they turned it into powder and made different pots and pans with it. And since heat did not destroy or damage it, the people back then really liked this material. Nowadays we know that asbestos is a very dangerous material and it's not a friendly thing to be around. But until humans figured this out, years went on and this mineral killed a lot of people. To know the deadly history of asbestos, we don't have to go 4,000 years back. Recently, this has shown how dangerous it is, and you would find it in most factories. But why is asbestos bad for humans? The tiny fibers that comes off this mineral could levitate in the air, and this causes it to enter your lungs. And just this alone is extremely dangerous for our health. If you look at the asbestos fibers in the microscope, you'll see that it's tiny shards and they look like mini knives. And that's why when it enters your lungs, it gets stuck in a place and it doesn't want to get out when you breathe out. The people that work with asbestos for a long time, one of the famous sickness they would get is lung cancer. And if they didn't get cancer, they would have damaged lungs. Until only a few years ago, asbestos was used in plenty of factories throughout the world. But why did it all of a sudden turn dangerous? Why is it only in recent times we hear that it's bad for us? The first time someone wrote negative things about asbestos was in Roman times, and it was when slaves were working in an asbestos mine and the people were dying. It was written that when the slaves worked here for a long time, they would have terrible coughs and they always have breathing problems, and they eventually die soon after. But it seems like nobody cared about this writing, and back then nobody cared about people's lives, especially slaves. The first modern asbestos mine that was opened up was in the year 1870 in Quebec, Canada. From the beginning of people working in this mine, it was written that people are getting sick, and it always has something to do with breathing problems. Nobody cared about this news either. 54 years passes and these mines all around the world continue to work and people keep dying. And then we get to the year 1924 when Nellie Kershaw, a British woman that used to work with asbestos since she was 13, but she ends up dying in her 30s. Since she was working in England, the British government was very suspicious of her death, and they tell people to investigate what exactly happened. They hire a physician by the name of Edward Merewether to figure out what happened to her and what caused her death. Dr. Merewether realizes that she is working with asbestos for pretty much all her life. And since it was mostly asbestos, she went to different factories to see how things are run around there. And the material that Ms. Kershaw was working with was from these factories. When Dr. Merewether got to these factories, he was dumbfounded because in just one factory alone, 378 people died working there, and it was all lungs-related problems. Dr. Edward Merewether tells the British government, whatever it is, it has something to do with asbestos, and it's very unhealthy for the lungs. But at that time, they really needed these asbestos factories, and that is why they tell them to add a ventilation system. These factories work with a ventilation system for more than 70 years, and people kept dying left and right. But eventually, at least in Europe, asbestos was made illegal. But that was in the year 2003. Making asbestos illegal only happened in Europe, but there are plenty of countries where it's still legal, especially the US. But the US has a different story because they handled a lot of lawsuits in asbestos factories where the employees used to sue the company because of health-related issues, and that was why they were forced to close these factories. The private facilities were all closed down, but asbestos is still produced in America, and when the employees actually have to handle this material, they have to be extremely careful and they have to pretty much wear a hazmat suit. Asbestos was used in plenty of things, like brake shoes, but it was mostly used in roofing tiles. But it's not like if your roof is made from asbestos, it means you're for sure gonna get sick because of it. It's not that easy, but if you want to work with this material and maybe cut it, break it, and make it into a powder, that's gonna be very dangerous. Not only for you, but the people around you as well. To work with this material, you need the right clothing, a respirator, and a set of goggles. You also have to know that back in the day, asbestos was used in insulation. And if you're working with old insulation, make sure what you're dealing with is not asbestos.